All right, all right, all right. What's happening, YouTube fam? So, I came to play an interview by Dr. I always screw her name up. Akusu Adoma Perbi. She wrote this book that I bought in Ghana on indigenous slavery in Ghana. For those of y'all who are slow, indigenous slavery means slavery in Africa, specifically Ghana, West Africa, and Central Africa, practiced before the white man and before the Arab. We have a history of enslaving and practicing slavery. And Dr. Perby gives a lecture on it, excuse me, gives an interview on it, and she wrote this book. So I just wanted to play her interview, and that's all. And this is without my input. So you can just listen to Dr. Perby teach on indigenous slavery in Africa. So let's go ahead and share the screen. And Push play.
A slave in our Ghanaian tradition is a person who has been bought in cash or kind. That is the first definition. Second definition is that some slaves they are like war captives. When you went to war, you always brought some home to show that you have won. It is like some people call it a trophy. You have won the war. So the first thing is that they see the slaves coming, then they know that no, this war has been successful. Because many people are following them who are not people they know in their town or village. The kings are the ones who go to the war. So in the king's or chief's palaces, I use king to refer to somebody who has a lot of territory and they are under him. A chief will have territory, but not as much as a king. So in Ghana or in Africa, we always make a difference between a king who has a kingdom and a chief who has a chiefdom. They are not the same size and they don't all have the same power. So either way, they will wage a war. So we first of all look at the fact that they have been caught or taken as war captives. Those are when you get a lot of people coming into the kingdom or the chiefdom. So that is the number one. And then the other ones are in kind or in cash. In some of the work I did in the archives, I was surprised to realize that in some court cases or disputes, somebody will say, "Can you please keep quiet, you slave? When your ancestors came here, they were bought with bananas." So that is the kind. In other words, cash at that time was cowries. If you had the number of cowries, you could buy maybe a certain number of slaves per person. But if you didn't have cowries, you could also use bananas, foodstuffs, to exchange for the slave. So the war captives are number one. Then the cowries, shells are number two. And then sometimes, because you don't have cash, it can be foodstuffs. You're a big farmer. You have a lot of plantain. You can take them to the slave market and buy a slave. And in my work, I discovered there were over 60 slave markets in Ghana. So in my thesis and in my book, I have given pictures and I've even drawn a map on the slave routes in Ghana and also in terms of the markets that were available for you to go and buy a slave, depending on your need. If you needed a few, 3 or 4 people to help you domestically in your home, you could go and buy 3 or 4. If you didn't have cowries, if you're a farmer, you exchange it with foodstuffs. So this is our definition in Ghana of a slave. 3 definitions. First, because the person has been caught in war. Secondly, because you've bought it in cash or kind. And thirdly, sometimes also some people who have many slaves but cannot maintain them can give it as a gift to a family relative or a member of the family or a relative, distant, whatever, or even a friend. Sometimes, especially the men who are mostly predominant in the slavery and slave trade, sometimes they look at some of the slaves and there are some beautiful girls among them. So they actually select. In Africa, we are polygamous. You can marry as many as you can, so long as select. In Africa, we are polygamous. You can marry as many as you can. So they actually select. In Africa, we are polygamous. You can marry as many as you can. So long
I just hit that repeat on that one.
as you have the money to take care of them. So they can decide, well, I have 3 wives. Let me add this one. Let me add this one. Before you can say, Jack, they've married about 6, 7 wives. And it's legitimate. There's nothing wrong with it in our tradition and many parts of Africa. So some of them even pick the beautiful girls just to marry them. That's all. The motive is that we want to add to the women we have, Mainly the other, because the people already in your town, you can't enslave them. It always have to come from somewhere. You You usually don't enslave people in your own town where you need them, especially the chiefs and kings, for farm work, for trading. In the areas where they had mines, gold mines, salt mines, you need labor. So sometimes the people in your own town use them for labor. But if you need more labor, you have to go outside your town or state. So that is where people would want more labor. You have to go outside your town or state.
That's called raiding a neighboring tribe. You need more labor to mine the gold in the gold mines.
So if you need more labor, you have to go outside your town or state. So that is where people would want to go to the slave market to purchase slaves. There were routes that went north all the way to Bondugu, way parts of Africa. There were also routes that went across from Nigeria, which was regarded as mainly from Hausa land, that crossed the coast. So from, let's say, Ivory Coast or even Senegal, all the way to Cameroon. There was also what we call the West African slave routes. There were several of them crisscrossing, but I talk about two main ones, which is easier in terms of the West African one, which will start from maybe Senegal, pass through the whole of West Africa up to Cameroon. Then there will be one which will pass through north. The north of Ghana will also go all the way to North Africa. And there were those who were crisscrossing, very big slave routes. It's another about 10 major ones, and crisscrossing another maybe 20 little ones. Then the north of Ghana will also go all the way to North Africa.
So, this is how sub-Saharan African DNA, the so small amounts of it, got to North Africa through slave trading.
And there were those who the north of Ghana will also go all the way to North Africa. And there were those who were crisscrossing, very big slave routes. It's another about 10 major ones, and crisscrossing another maybe 20 little ones. That's also a huge thing to study and learn. So there were routes people, and at every point of the routes, there were people who were guarding the routes and making sure that the traders who were coming or going had protection. And of course, you paid for it in kind. There was no money except for cowries. That was the form of exchange. Or else you may decide that, can you take these 3 captives for payment for whatever services you give to me? So that was the way it was done. I think the difference is that slavery is an act of making somebody a slave. So the institution whereby you get somebody and then the person is going to remain with you forever till the person died or the owner died, and then decided that in Africa, when a person dies, there's a way in which they share their property. So the elders will assemble and say, well, we have about 100 slaves. How do we share these slaves? So they look amongst themselves and then, give everybody some. Then there's also the idea that you yourself went and bought the slave. So it's your personal property. So in that case, some people make a will in terms of oral. We couldn't write those days, but they always had oral tradition, whereby they will assemble members of the family and say, when I die, this is what I want to be done. So it passes on from generation to generation. Now the chattel slavery you don't find much of it in Africa. In chattel, it means that, excuse me to say, you treat the person like a horse or a mule or a donkey. So the person is really not a human being when it's chattel. Use him however you like. Do whatever we want with him. But in Africa, there was a difference. In Africa, we have the tradition of making people members of our family. Sometimes somebody will go for trading, and on the way, the person realizes that there is danger. There are people who are way late to catch them and sell them. So they'll go back and say, I want to stay here till the roads are clear. Sometimes the roads never clear. So they stay there, and there are traditions that they do, pour a drink, do this, and swear to the ancestors that this person wants to be part of our family. That is also there. But there are those who feel they are bold enough, they are going down to the coast to sell maybe exchange coca nuts for European products or exchange salts. And then those who are willing on the way can catch the slaves. They may not call them slaves, but they catch the people and in the end send them into slavery. So there wasn't one method, there were several, depending on the state you were in, depending on the circumstances, you know. And I happen to be an Asante. And from the research
Asante gang.
I did, you know, and I happen to be an Asante. And from the research I did, both written records and also oral tradition, I found that Asante was the greatest slave-owning state in Ghana because they went to a lot of war. There are so many war captives. So what do you do with them? So you always look at your state need. How many do we need for farming? How many do we need for housework? You know, you look at all that, and the rest you send to the coast to be sold.
So she's saying they capture and raid neighboring tribes and get slaves, basically. They keep some for themselves and they send the rest to the markets or to shore.
State need. How many do we need for farming? How many do we need for housework? You know, you look at all that, and the rest you send to the coast to be sold. You know, you look at all that, and the rest you send to the coast to be sold. You know, you look at all that, and the rest you send to the coast to be sold. So you can't use one definition or one way. It was like they had several ways of buying slaves and several ways of also disposing of them. When I was doing this research, at a point my mother told me, if you bring that case from our hometown, I won't sit here and listen. And my father said, but it went to court. So my father said, my father is an academician as well, music and so on. He said, you know what, I have a lot of drum music. You can use some of this in your work. I have horn music, I have drum music. And they talk in proverbs. So unless you study the people and say, why are you saying this? Because in one of the drum language he gave to me, he said, you play the drum and say, I was bought from Salaga. The chief brought me from Salaga for maybe 2,000 kola nuts. And then you ask, why are you playing this in the chief's palace? Well, I'm playing what the chief has directed me to do. So they also have a smart way of covering their owners and their laws and because they are taking good care of them. That is it. So my father recorded a lot of horn music that had to do with slavery. So I went to him and said, Daddy, can you explain this? And he gave me a lot in my book. And he even wrote the foreword to my book. And he said it's not because of the blood relationship that he's writing the foreword, but because he also has done a lot of research on slavery within Ghana and has realized that some of the songs they are singing has to do with let the slave sleep. So he notices, he records it. But plays the horn or the drum. I was brought from the north. I was brought from the Otomisrim. Nananso Tomisrim in Pensa. My father translated. He brought me from the north. The chief brought me from the north for 3,000 kola nuts. So he gave me a lot of music things to share, which I did in my book and some of my thesis. In some of my interviews, and I said I'm going to write a second book, I've written the dates of the interview. I've left out the names. But sometimes at the end of the book, like my first book, I wrote respondents. So those who don't mind that I put them at the end of the book, you'll find their names. I indicate who they are, their chiefs, their linguists, or I indicate that a linguist in the Asante Escort, or a linguist in Asante Mampong Court. Because some of them actually warned me that if I'm going to tell people who they were, their ancestry was, I'll be in big trouble. Because my name is on the book, your name is on the work. They have children, grandchildren at Legon University where you teach. They can find you out easily. So I've had to say some who are willing to share with you. But at every point, whether you are talking to a Ga or Ewe or a Dangme or a Santiwach, anywhere in the north, everywhere, and I've been to everywhere in the north, because I usually take a letter from the university to cover me and indicate that we are doing academic work. This is not for fault finding or, And then as soon as they realize that the university stamp is on it with a letter from the top of the hill, in other words, our registry, they give me audience. And but what they don't like is to tape it. Anytime we want to bring a tape so that some of the songs they are singing want to tape, they'll say, no, we don't like the tape. Then I'll say, why? That's when you are quoting me, and I may be caught for something. So we can't erase history. I think that is how I end it. History cannot be erased. And for the African who still is interested in oral tradition, because not all people go to school, but they are in the courts. They are serving the queen, they are serving the king, they are serving the chief. It means that first of all, you swear that when you come to work in the palace, you are not going to leak things out. And then you even swear to the Senate, if they leak things out, I should be finished. So they swear an oath, all of those who are working in the palace. So until they unswear it, they can't tell me secrets. But a few of them, I went to the Asantini's court, and a few of them realized that the Asantini was giving me audience, and so some of them, Asantini said they should give me audience and let me record or write, and many of them agreed. So I got a lot of my information, let's say about 70%, from Menchia, the Asantini's court, which is the head of all the other kingdoms, because the Asantini knew my father. The Asantini at that time was a lawyer, and he was also there. So as soon as I mentioned my father's name, he said, Kwablanketi's daughter, no problem. You are a lecturer? I said, yes. You are in the university teaching? No problem. We don't mind. We don't want those who will come and just dig our past or, So that is how. So I don't think it will stop, because oral tradition can't stop in Africa and in Ghana.
That was one of her interviews. Here's another interesting interview with Dr. Akosua Adoma Perbi, who is a professor at the University of Ghana. Um, and she's over archives department. She's gathered oral traditions and written traditions to compile her book. Here's another interview.
The trade, especially the external trade, we would get.
Enslavement.
Okay. Talk to me about the African memory of this period in history, and how willing are many people to talking about it and visiting.
Africans remember enslavement so well. The research I've done shows that I've been involved in looking at Ghana in particular from 1990. I've been to about all the 10 regions of the country, conducting interviews with chiefs, elders, state historians, old men and women, anybody who can remember something about enslavement. And it's amazing the kind of information and material I have got about it. Many of them regard enslavement as a very sensitive issue. And what I've done is that in my research, I've tried to identify with the people. And I've used some of my students in the Department of History. And I've always warned my students that I would want students who come from the area to undertake this research. I don't want somebody who is spending holidays in the area, because a lot of people regard it as so sensitive that if they don't know you, they wouldn't disclose some vital information to you. So the memory is still real, and people are very reluctant to talk about it because it brings up some kind of unpleasant memories sometimes. And I think another reason why is because there were two aspects to enslavement in Ghana and in most Africa. There was what I'll call an internal aspect, or what people call an indigenous aspect of enslavement. And then there was an external aspect, that is enslavement between Africa and the outside world, either with the Mediterranean or Red Sea, Indian Ocean world, or with the Atlantic world. And because of this, we still have some memories about both enslavement, especially the indigenous one, because where do you draw the line? There are some families during my research who were reluctant to talk because they could remember that their great-grandfathers, great-grandmothers had brought slaves from Salaga Market, made them part of the household. And therefore, if we are going to now start tracing genealogies, who comes from where, who comes from there, it starts creating problems. So some of them don't want to talk about it.
Is there a memory of a lost people who have disappeared, who are part of families, and is there a clear sense of where those people might be?
A few of them, but it wasn't very.
Speak from that and them, let me know who we're talking about. A few of the people I talked to.
A few of the people I talked to in the course of my research could remember that there was a loss of people, loss of population. Those in the northern part of Ghana, for example, claim that there are still parts in Ghana right now which are desolated because of enslavement. And they could recall raids and wars, kidnapping, and so on. And a friend was telling me that in a certain part of the northern country, a place called Sandema, every year when they have a festival, they bring out certain artifacts connected with enslavement. And they've ritualized it to the extent that nobody will tell you about it until the festival is on. And then you find them bringing chains and bangles and so on, and virtually worshipping them in memory of what they went through during enslavement. And that was an area where there was a lot of slave raiding going on, slave kidnapping during the period of enslavement. And then on the coastal parts of the country, there were a few cases of depopulation. And there was one case in which an ethnic song in Ghana.
Okay, Professor Perbi, talk to me about.
So basically, Africans depopulated their own population, raiding and kidnapping just to make money and sell them to the outside world. White folks didn't come in and snatch people up like we thought. It was on top of the board, on top of the table negotiations. And Africans brought slaves to the coast for white folk. Complicit equally.
And looking back in time, how did trade operate? How were people captured, and what happened to them once they were captured?
The picture of the past enslavement in Ghana or Africa is one in which you find different means of acquiring slaves. I can identify about 5 major means of acquisition. The first was through warfare, and that was really a major means of acquisition. Now, I don't think we want to enter into that debate whether the wars were fought because of enslavement or enslavement was incidental to the wars, because there is still a disagreement. But what I have found in my own research as I talk to chiefs, elders, and so on, is that enslavement was incidental to the wars which were fought in Ghana. In other words, the wars were not expressly fought because they wanted to catch slaves. But there were several reasons for warfare: expansion, conquest, retaliation, aggression, and so on. And if you look through the history of the world from ancient times, you find that it was a practice that whenever you engage in a war and you became victorious, you take away prisoners of war. And inevitably, these prisoners of war became enslaved as a result. So it became an ancient practice which was carried on through the modern period. And so if you look at Ghana history and Africa history, from about the 15th century to the 19th, early 19th century, you find warfare as one major means of enslavement. And it's very striking, especially when we come to Atlantic enslavement, because although warfare was a source of enslavement for both internal and external, you find that the external demand was so high that warfare played a very major role in it. And if you read some of the travelers' accounts and traders' memoirs, you find them mentioning sometimes that in the early 1700s, for example, there was a gentleman called Barbot, a French trader, and he said he had combed the whole of the coastline in Ghana and found only 8 slaves from east to west. But 2-3 weeks earlier, because there was warfare, somebody had gotten about 200 to 300 slaves. And you find them expressing these things in their memoirs as you read. And they seem to be sad that there is no war. So it created a very major means of providing slaves. So the first was warfare. The second major means was what I'll call direct purchase. There were several markets scattered throughout the continent and different parts of the country where people could go to and buy slaves. Now, I've realized as I've researched about the slave markets that people did not go, the markets were not solely for slaves, but there were other items also being traded in. But as you enter the market, you find places for foodstuffs, places for household wear, etc. And then you find perhaps a section of the market also devoted for a trade in human beings. And I've been amazed in the course of my research to find that I've discovered at least about 35 of such slave markets in Ghana alone. And every region in Ghana had at least 2 or 3 slave markets. And what is significant about this is that with respect to the indigenous enslavement, the ordinary person could go to any of the markets and buy a slave or two for personal use. And so the markets were the commonest source of acquiring slaves so far as the indigenous system was concerned. It also helped the external system, but warfare was the major source for the external system. And the markets was the commonest source for the ordinary person who would go to the market, depending on your demand and your personal requirement, to buy 1 or 2 or whatever number of slaves you wanted to buy. So that was the market source. And then the third source was through what I'll call raids and kidnapping. We find that different states in Ghana, the kings and chiefs would go to their neighbors and raid or kidnap people and enslave them. There was to their neighbors and raid or kidnap people and enslave them. There was one particular state in Ghana called Akwamu, which was noted for this. In the 18th century, 2 of their chiefs organized bands just to raid and kidnap for the Atlantic enslavement. And there were reports that different parts of the coast in Ghana were also involved in raiding and kidnapping. And then the northern part of Ghana was also noted for a lot of slave raiding and kidnapping during the period of enslavement. So that was a third source. The fourth is what I'll call tribute. Tribute was when a state defeated another state and asked the defeated state to pay tribute.
Now, paying tribute is also what Nubians did with Egyptians. Nubians was a tributary state, or Nubia, or Cushites, was a tributary state. They paid tribute to the Egyptians by honoring them, bringing them trinkets and gold and ivory and skins, animal skins, and they brought the Egyptians Nubian slaves because they were paying tribute. Just like they did here in Ghana to other neighboring tribes who were greater than them, they paid tribute to them. Here we go.
And in the fourth is what I'll call tribute. Tribute was when a state defeated another state and asked the defeated state to pay tribute. And in the past, normally you would look at what the state produced. For example, if it was a gold producing area, you would ask the state to provide maybe so many ounces of gold a year as tribute. Or if they produced yams or any kind of foodstuffs, you would tell them to produce a certain quantity a year. And during the period of enslavement, especially when the Atlantic enslavement was introduced, the picture you get is that instead of asking only for foodstuffs, some of the kings and chiefs would also ask for human beings as part of their tribute. And especially Asante was noted for this. And Asante, for example, would ask Salaga for about 1,000 slaves every year, would ask some people from the coastal parts, Fante, Ga, to provide maybe another 500 or 300 slaves every year. So tribute was another means of enslavement. And the last means, I talked about 5 means, the last is what I'll call minor sources of enslavement. For example, if somebody owed a debt, he couldn't pay, he could be enslaved. Or somebody was convicted of a crime, he could be enslaved. Or sometimes through deception, people could be enslaved through deception. But these were very, very small instances of enslavement.
Describe for me, give me a portrait of the kinds of people who were either captured or paid in tribute, or even found themselves victims of raids, who found themselves enslaved and were then a part of the mass of people who traveled across the ocean to the Americas.
Yes. The kind of people who were enslaved was a broad spectrum because normally, if it was war or raids or kidnapping, they'll move into a town or a village and conquer and take all the people. And when you read the documents, you find statements like they've dragged all the men, women, boys, and girls away. Sometimes you find that they've left the older men and the older women, but they've taken the young boys, the girls away. So you find that it's the people in the prime of their youth who are usually taken. And sometimes it goes through a series of processes. First of all, you raid a group or you engage in warfare, you bring en masse to your home, that is your capital, thousands of prisoners of warfare. And then sometimes they go through sorting, looking at what the indigenous requirement is. So you look at what you have, the men, the women, the boys, the girls, what your internal needs would be like. And then you decide that, well, for example, if you've got about 100 slaves and you have about 50 men, 50 women, or 25 men, 25 boys, 50, 25 girls, 25, you decide that maybe I'll leave 20, 24 in the state and send the rest away. Inevitably, what happened was that 24 in the state and send the rest away.
So they keep some slaves for themselves after they raid it just to get slaves and kidnap to get girls and concubines and things. They keep some for themselves and send the rest to the coast. The white man don't come get them. They send these people to the coast.
Inevitably, what happened was that a lot of the younger people who were strong and who could work were those who were really demanded during the period of enslavement because of the kind of work people wanted them to do. So your needs determined the kind of people you would take. So you find a broad spectrum of people, young boys, girls, women, and men. And it is generally believed that Africans wanted more of the women than the men during the period of enslavement. So we have more women used internally and more men sent away on enslavement. But it also included women.
Were the demands or the interests of the Europeans and their own needs for a workforce a part of whether men or women were the dominant group sent overseas?
Yes.
Okay, so I just played a couple interviews. This one's long. I don't feel like playing the whole interview. Um, but I will post that interview. Um, Matter of fact, let me put it in the description. Oops, never mind. But I'll put it in the description when I'm done, which I am basically. Um, Let me read some of these comments. Here is first name BR. Hey, you should go back and watch my last live I did in my other lives. You know, what I mean, I mention this all the time. Um, I say Africans didn't have ships or ships capable of long travel like the Europeans in the Mediterranean world, right? North Africa and the Berbers and Arabs, right? So they weren't able to travel to other places and grab people or invade other countries and things like that. So what they did, their shit on land since they couldn't do it on sea, and that West and Central Africans were not seafaring people. Okay, Sub-Saharan Africa was not a seafaring people due to their geography. So they did their invasions and conquering on land, just like Europeans in the Mediterranean world and Arabs and Berbers did their conquering and invading. But they all, whether it was the European or the Mediterranean peoples or the African people, they all did invading and raiding and capturing of other people, right? They all practiced slavery, right? So, with the question, while we was in Africa doing this to each other, did sub-Saharan Africa invade Europe and Arab peoples and enslave them also? So no, they didn't do it because they didn't have seafaring ships to do so. If they did, they damn sure would have captured people, placed them all on ships, and brought them back. But what they did do, if you watched my lecture on, is titled um, Nubians as Slaves to the Egyptians and Geography. Listen, last week I did this. Nubian slaves to the Egyptians and Africa's geography. So I spoke on the geography and how sub-Saharan Africans were landlocked and not able to do certain things and trade with the rest of the world, the Mediterranean world. Like the Mediterranean world and Arabs, they were able to trade and exchange ideas and learn and grow and progress from each other. Sub-Saharan Africans being landlocked and under the Sahara Desert weren't able to do that like the rest of the world. So their interactions were only with itself. You get what I'm saying? Yeah, so he's asking, do I believe if they were seafaring, would they invaded Europe? Yeah. Like when I went to Ghana, a Ghanaian told me African people are brutal to other Africans. The brutality is cold blooded. So when people compare the brutality, all you got to do is preview the Rwandan wars and the genocide in Rwanda. Africans were brutal to each other. I mean, like 500,000 rapes, million people dead. I mean, just brutal. Just coming in and macheting people, shooting people. Brutal. So we can't escape the brutality of sub-Saharan Africans. It's just a reality. It's not nothing I'm making up or saying or claiming. The Rwanda genocide was real. You know what I mean? So I just wanted to show an interview of the of Dr. Perbi of Ghana University teach about what her people did and how they are complicit in the slave trade. I didn't play no black American. I played a Ghanaian scholar who was a PhD at Ghana University telling you the truth of their hand in the slave trade. Um, First name BR. This is another question along the same line. I think I answered it for you. Yes, they colonized neighboring tribes in neighboring countries. Queen Nzinga conquered neighboring tribes in neighboring countries, just like the Dutch and the British did. Exactly like that, just without ships. And they made sure they was gonna put niggas on ships, so they helped the Brits and the Dutch. I was watching a documentary on the Congo and poachers in the Congo, the poachers of elephants, and how they so and how they are searching for the oil that's in Congo. The Congo region has some oil. So they have these what they call SOCO, SOCO. organization trying to get over there, but it's illegal to drill for oils. But the Congo, it's some Congo citizens. The Congolese army is selling out to make money so they can drill in parts of the Congo. It's like I'm watching these Africans literally say, "We don't give a fuck about no goddamn oil. We want some money." Um, so a lot of this, um, um, when people say, "Oh, they're stealing our resources," they're stealing our diamonds, they're stealing this. These are resources that Africans refused to mine or dig or seek, and they agreed and accepted and let Europeans come over and pay them to mine or dig so they can get some money. And here it is, all their resources gone. But you agreed to let these people do this. And just yesterday, last night, I'm watching this documentary. Africans in the Congo say, "We don't give a fuck about this oil. What's up with the money?" So they're giving, in certain regions, in particular regions, them permission to dig for oil. Instead of the Congolese government putting its foot down and saying, "Hey, we need to learn how to frack," or however they do it. We need to learn how to drill and get some of this oil and get this oil for ourselves and our own resources and make our own nation big up and big and prosperous. But they prefer to sell it, to contract it out. This is the politicking of how Africa is politicking wrong. And then we'll sit here as black Americans and blame every other nations, Europeans and Arabs, for the shit of stealing resources, not knowing that the Africans themselves agreed to let them do this so they can get money. You get what I'm saying? It's like, it's crazy when you really dig deep into it. He asked, "Do I think colonization had a role in what happened with Rwanda?" Somewhat. But when I looked into it, I, colonization, um, um, peace, Carter C. Goodson. When I look into it, the colonization does not make 250,000 women be raped. These are personal decisions that they make outside of what other of any colonist. You get what I'm saying? Didn't nobody tell them and make them and force them to rape women. These are decisions they made on their own. Bad politics. It's like a lot of people, black Americans, make this excuse that because of poverty is why we black Americans commit crimes. I disagree with that. If by that logic it was true, that would mean these third world countries should be crime ridden and they should be killing and fighting each other because they're poor. It's not happening. You can go to Ghana right now and you will rarely ever, listen to what I'm telling you, you will rarely see a street fight. They don't do it. They have better morals. When I was in Ghana, somebody told me, "Oh, they're gonna break it up. Everybody gonna run and break up this fight." And then I said, "Oh, you're kidding? These cats are scrap." We be having these discussions with the help in Ghana, right? So I remember it was the help who was helping carry our luggage and do different things, and they get a little fee. And it was a boss and one of the workers arguing back and forth about some bullshit. They was in each other's face, talking loud in each other's face. And I'm sitting here like, what this nigga swing? I hope he swing on his ass. Swing on this nigga. I realized that my mindset in me, I'm a savage as a black American. Soon as they got in each other's face and going off, couple women and men ran over there to break it up, and they never threw any blows. I said you were right. They don't fight much out here. They don't steal from each other much, and they vibe and get along all in their poverty. Matter of fact, they will help their neighbor, and they're not stealing and fighting each other. So I don't agree with poverty is causing certain crimes. Vietnamese came over here poor. A lot of them are still poor, but you don't see them acting a fool, stealing and fighting and killing and going on, right? So I've come to see a lot of these third world countries and poor people are not as violent as we are, and we living well. The poorest of black Americans are living great compared to poor people in other countries. You have to understand that. A polecat in Compton, in Detroit, if we fall on hard times, we getting food stamps. We getting welfare to save us. They not getting no food stamps and welfare in other countries if they fall on hard times. They're gonna have to sweat it out. They're gonna have to put a basket on their head full of goods and walk them streets and sell shit. So I don't know if poverty is making people commit crimes. I know damn well black folk are leading in the category of rape by percentage. Poverty don't make you take no pussy. Right. Back in the day, poor and not ratchet, they had community. Right. So I'd like people to do a re-review on thinking because a people's poor, then that's gonna make them rape and rob our bank and do this type of shit. I had to explain to people poverty's not making nobody rob no banks. Mm-mm. Cause first of all, I don't know. I'm 52. I know in Cali when niggas back in the day in the 80s and 90s and shit was robbing banks. They don't do it as much no more because they've got you getting some serious time. But when niggas was just robbing banks and shit back in the 90s and shit, the only cats who was robbing banks was niggas who had money already. A dope man and his homies who was balling and had money devised some scheme to get more money and rob the bank. Bank robbery is not a poor man's shit job. Bank robbery requires intellectual capabilities and a plan, and usually people who rob bank already have money and they just trying to get more money. So it wasn't poverty that made them rob a bank. It was just bad behavior. Right? So yeah, but I do think um, he asked this question. Colonization did have a little bit of a role in what happened in Rwanda, for the simple fact that all them firearms that they got came from Europeans. You get what I'm saying? So a lot of those killings couldn't have happened without being flooded with weapons from these European nations. Although there's some old weapons. When I was watching this Congo documentary last night, I stayed up late. I said, these are some old ass fucking weapons. I'm surprised this shit ain't jamming and shit on their ass. Old rusty ass shit, you know what I mean? Some shit the British shit didn't want and shit, so they gave them to the, you know what I mean? Yeah. So that's all. I just wanted to share the interview with Dr. Perbi about indigenous slavery in Africa. And she really enlightened me to a lot of things. Um, and since I read this book, I've been on a mission to teaching about indigenous slavery ever since. Myra Jackson says at this stage, can things change for the better for us in the Black America? Yeah. If you watch my video I made yesterday, right? About the crime stats in America. I made a video, and I've been saying I'm gonna make this video for a year about the crime stats in America, and I make the claim that black Americans are the most violent and the most criminal in America. Black folk get all the uproar about it. But I had to prove it, and I showed the stats. I showed all the FBI stats that all violent crimes black Americans lead in by percentage. Now, she's asked at this stage, can things change for the better? If, I make the analogy, a recovering alcoholic, the only way he can change is to admit he is an alcoholic. He goes to the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous and say, "My name is Chief X and I'm an alcoholic." When he does that, that is the beginning of his change and progress. He admits he has a problem, and then he moves forward to change and recover. If you don't admit that and recover, that means you don't, as a people or as a person, you don't think you have a problem. So you're in denial about your alcoholism or about your bad behavior in America. You're in denial about it, so you can't change because you don't believe you have a problem. You don't believe niggas is acting a fool. You don't believe this, so people just continue on what they're doing. So the only way we can change is people do what, like I said, and all black folk start accepting responsibility for black people's behavior, even though you may not behaving bad. But you see what's going on in Chicago and the hoods and all kind of shit. You see what's going on in hip hop. Crazy. Hip hop is crazy right now. Once we all admit, yeah, we fucking up in America. We need to change. And we need to stop pointing the finger at any other race, turn in on ourselves, admit we have a problem, and move forward in progress. That's it. He says, I think entertainment and music geared towards black Americans really brainwashed a lot of people, in my opinion. That's true. Music affects people. I used to be in denial about music making people act up and shit like, oh, whatever. But I had to realize every time I hear some gangster rap, like when I'm playing that beat by Battle Cat and I'm hearing that West Coast gangster rap, a lot of times it made me do this and throw up signs, and I'd be like, what's making me, who don't gang bang, throw up gang signs? You get what I'm saying? Something triggered me. And that gangster rap made me and I'm sitting here like, I don't even gangbang. So music and lyrics do affect people. What Carter C. Goodson say, definitely. If I can change or you can change, we as a people can change. Accountability and correction is necessary. We have to lead by example. I think we need to do this to stop pointing the finger shit at white folk as if white folk is making us do shit. Just about every crime I can tell you, ain't no white boy made no nigga do that shit in 2022. Now, if a mama had stole, done some petty theft and shit, and stole some food out the grocery store to feed her baby because she was down and out, that's understandable. But those aren't prevalent. You know, that's not prevalent. All right, y'all. I'm out of here. Wait a minute. Right, left a lot. In rehab, the first thing they teach is accountability. Is the beginning of change. Yep. In the 12-step program, being accountable for your actions is the beginning of change. Long as black folk is pointing the finger, we're not even anywhere close to changing. Long as y'all keep saying, see, the white man is bad. See, the white man is devil. See, and pointing the finger and trying to avoid responsibility, and it's going to continue. But since we're in competition with white folk, people find it hard to admit we fucking up. I don't have no problem. Black folk, we fucking up. But other black folk have a problem admitting this and saying this because they're in competition with white folk, and they don't want it to seem like white folk is behaving better than black folk. It's all mental and psychological. Y'all be good.